The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of St. Peter's Square as Vatican security teams conducted their final preparations. Inside the Apostolic Palace, Pope Francis reviewed his notes one last time before what would become one of the most significant royal visits in recent papal history. The date was April 27th, 2023, and the world was watching as two of the most traditional institutions prepare to meet. King Charles III had been monarch for less than 8 months, still adjusting to the weight of the crown that had passed to him after Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022. The Vatican visit represented more than diplomatic protocol. It was a chance for the new king to establish his own relationship with the Catholic Church and demonstrate his commitment to interfaith dialogue. Queen Camilla stood before the ornate mirror in their Rome hotel suite, adjusting the modest black dress she had chosen for the papal audience. The dress code for meeting the Pope required covered shoulders, long sleeves, and a black or dark blue outfit with a mantilla or veil for female visitors. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying Vatican protocol and the complex history between the British monarchy and the Catholic Church. The relationship between Britain's Protestant monarchy and the Vatican had been complicated for centuries. Henry VIII's break with Rome in the 16th century had created a divide that took hundreds of years to bridge. It wasn't until 1982 that a reigning British monarch had visited the Pope, when Queen Elizabeth II met Pope John Paul II at the Vatican. The visit had been groundbreaking, marking a new era of cooperation between the Anglican Church and Roman Catholicism. Charles had always been interested in different faiths and traditions. As Prince of Wales, he had often spoken about being a defender of faith rather than defender of the faith, suggesting his desire to protect all religious communities rather than just the Anglican Church. This philosophy would guide his approach to the papal meeting. The royal couple's motorcade departed their hotel at exactly 9:30 a.m., following a route that had been carefully planned and secured by both British and Vatican security services. The streets of Rome buzzed with excitement as word spread that the British monarchs were making their way to the Vatican. Tourists and locals alike lined the roads, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal visitors. As their armored vehicle wound through Rome's ancient streets, Charles gazed out at the Eternal City. He had visited Rome many times before as Prince of Wales, but this journey felt different. He was no longer the heir apparent, but the king himself, representing not just Britain, but the entire Commonwealth realm. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. Camilla noticed her husband's contemplative mood and reached over to squeeze his hand. They had been through so much together, from their early controversial relationship to their eventual marriage in 2005, and finally, to this moment when she stood beside him as queen consort. The Vatican visit represented another milestone in their shared journey. The motorcade approached Vatican City's Sant'Anna Gate, where Swiss guards in their distinctive blue and yellow uniforms stood at attention. The Swiss Guard, established in 1506, had been protecting the Pope for over 500 years. Their presence added to the sense of history and tradition that surrounded every papal audience. Vatican protocol officers had been preparing for this visit for months. Every detail had been carefully planned, from the route through the Vatican museums to the timing of the audience itself. The Pope's schedule was always packed, but this meeting had been given special priority due to its diplomatic and religious significance. As the royal car passed through the gate and entered Vatican City, Charles felt the weight of history. This tiny city-state, less than half a square kilometer in size, wielded influence far beyond its physical boundaries. With over 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide, the Pope's words and actions could affect millions of lives. The Vatican had undergone significant changes under Pope Francis's leadership. The Argentine Pope, elected in 2013, had brought a more informal and accessible approach to the papacy. He had made interfaith dialogue one of his priorities, reaching out to other Christian denominations, Judaism, Islam, and other world religions. This made him an ideal partner for Charles's own vision of inclusive religious leadership. Queen Camilla had studied Pope Francis's background extensively in preparation for their meeting. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, he had chosen the name Francis after Saint Francis of Assisi, known for his dedication to the poor and to peace. The Pope's focus on social justice and environmental issues aligned closely with many of Charles's own passions. The royal motorcade pulled up to the San Damaso courtyard, a magnificent Renaissance courtyard within the Apostolic Palace. Swiss guards and Vatican gendarmes lined the route as the couple stepped out of their vehicle. The April morning was crisp and clear, perfect weather for such an important occasion. Monsignor Leonardo Sapienza, the Vatican's chief of protocol, greeted the royal couple with a deep bow. His role was to ensure that every aspect of the visit proceeded according to ancient Vatican traditions while also accommodating the specific needs of the British monarchy. The meeting of two such formal institutions required careful choreography. As they walked through the Vatican's ornate corridors, Charles marveled at the artistic treasures surrounding them. The walls were lined with frescoes by master painters, sculptures that had stood for centuries, and tapestries that told the story of Christian faith. The Vatican museums housed one of the world's greatest art collections, accumulated over 2 millennia of papal history. They passed through the Sala Clementina, a grand hall where many important papal audiences had taken place. The room's elaborate ceiling and marble columns created an atmosphere of solemnity and grandeur that reminded visitors of the Vatican's central role in world affairs. Cardinals and Vatican officials who had gathered for the audience bowed respectfully as the royal couple passed. The couple was then escorted to a smaller antechamber where they would wait before their private audience with Pope Francis. This room, decorated with religious art and comfortable seating, provided a moment of calm before the historic meeting. Vatican staff offered them water and ensured they were comfortable. Charles used these quiet moments to reflect on what he hoped to accomplish during their meeting. Beyond the diplomatic courtesies, he wanted to discuss substantive issues: climate change, religious persecution, poverty, and the role of faith in modern society. These were topics where the king and the Pope shared common ground and could potentially collaborate. Queen Camilla reviewed her own agenda for the meeting. As someone who had faced significant public scrutiny and criticism, particularly in the years following Princess Diana's death, she understood the importance of this moment for her own standing as queen consort. The papal audience would demonstrate her acceptance not just in Britain, but on the world stage. The sound of footsteps in the corridor indicated that their moment had arrived. Monsignor Sapienza appeared at the doorway and announced that Pope Francis was ready to receive them. The king and queen stood, smoothed their formal attire, and prepared to enter the papal library where history would be made. The papal library, also known as the Pope's private study, was an intimate setting for such meetings. Unlike the grand audiences that took place in St. Peter's Basilica or the Paul VI Audience Hall, this private meeting would allow for genuine conversation and personal connection. The room was lined with theological texts, historical documents, and personal mementos that reflected the Pope's interests and background. As the doors opened, they could see Pope Francis standing near his desk, dressed in his simple white cassock and zacchetto. At 86 years old, the Pope moved slowly but with dignity, his face breaking into the warm smile that had become his trademark around the world. The contrast between his simple attire and the ornate surroundings emphasized his commitment to humility and service. The formal introductions followed centuries-old protocol. Monsignor Sapienza announced, "Your Holiness, I have the honor to present His Majesty King Charles III and Her Majesty Queen Camilla." Both monarchs bowed respectfully, Charles offering a slight bow of the head, while Camilla performed a deeper curtsy, as was traditional for female visitors. Pope Francis stepped forward with outstretched hands, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Your Majesties," he said in accented English, "welcome to the Vatican. It is a great honor to receive you here." His voice carried the authority of his office, but also a grandfatherly kindness that immediately put his visitors at ease. The initial exchange of pleasantries revealed the careful preparation both sides had made. The Pope inquired about their journey from London and their impressions of Rome. Charles spoke about his long-standing appreciation for the Eternal City and his respect for the Vatican's role in world affairs. Queen Camilla mentioned her honor at being received and her gratitude for the Pope's hospitality. As the formal photographs were taken by Vatican and royal photographers, the three figures formed a tableau that would appear in newspapers around the world. The image of the Protestant British monarchs standing beside the Catholic Pope symbolized centuries of reconciliation and the possibility of continued cooperation between different branches of Christianity. The photographers were then dismissed, leaving the three leaders alone for their private conversation. This was when the real work would begin, away from the cameras and formal protocol. The next hour would determine whether this was merely a ceremonial visit or the beginning of a new chapter in relations between the British Crown and the Vatican. Pope Francis gestured toward comfortable chairs arranged in a corner of the library. "Please let us sit and talk as friends," he said, his informal manner reflecting his approach to papal leadership. The king and queen took their seats, grateful for the more relaxed atmosphere that would allow for genuine dialogue. The conversation began with Queen Elizabeth II, Charles's mother, whose long reign had spanned multiple papal tenures. Pope Francis spoke warmly of his admiration for the late Queen's dedication to duty and her role in promoting peace and stability throughout the world. She was a woman of great faith, the Pope observed, and her example inspired people of all religions. Charles nodded, visibly moved by the Pope's words about his mother. "The Queen always believed in the importance of dialogue between faiths," he replied. "She saw religion not as a source of division, but as a force for good in the world. I hope to continue that tradition as king." This opening exchange set the tone for what would become a wide-ranging discussion covering many of the most pressing issues facing the modern world. The three leaders found themselves in surprising agreement on many topics, despite the theological differences between their institutions. Climate change emerged as a central theme of their conversation. Both the king and the Pope had been vocal advocates for environmental protection, though their motivations came from different sources. For Charles, it was a combination of scientific concern and spiritual stewardship of creation. For Pope Francis, environmental protection was deeply connected to Catholic social teaching and care for the poor, who suffered most from environmental degradation. "The earth is crying out," Pope Francis said, his voice carrying deep emotion. "We have treated creation as if it belongs to us alone, forgetting that we are caretakers, not owners." Charles nodded vigorously, remembering his own decades of environmental activism that had sometimes been dismissed as eccentric but now seemed prophetic. The discussion moved to religious persecution, a topic close to both leaders' hearts. Around the world, Christians faced violence and discrimination in many countries, while other religious minorities also suffered persecution. The king spoke about his role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England and his concern for Anglicans facing persecution in various parts of the world. Pope Francis shared stories from his travels to countries where Christians lived as minorities, often facing significant challenges. "Faith should bring people together," he reflected, "but too often it becomes a source of conflict. We must work harder to show that believers of different traditions can live in peace and mutual respect." Queen Camilla contributed to the conversation by discussing her observations during royal visits to Commonwealth countries with diverse religious populations. She had seen firsthand how religious leaders could either inflame tensions or work as peacemakers, and she emphasized the importance of moderate voices in all faith traditions. The hour passed quickly as the three leaders discovered their shared commitment to serving others and making the world a better place. Despite their different backgrounds and beliefs, they found common ground in their dedication to peace, justice, and human dignity. The formal audience was drawing to a close, but the real impact of their meeting was just beginning. As Pope Francis prepared to present the traditional papal gifts to his royal visitors, he reflected on how this meeting represented both continuity and change. The ancient institutions they represented were adapting to modern challenges while maintaining their core values and traditions. The future would require even more cooperation between different faith communities, and this meeting had demonstrated that such cooperation was both possible and beneficial. The gift exchange ceremony at the Vatican followed traditions that dated back centuries, each present carefully chosen to reflect both respect and symbolic meaning. Pope Francis moved toward an ornate wooden table where several items had been arranged by his staff, each wrapped in the distinctive white and gold paper used exclusively for papal gifts. The first gift presented to King Charles was a leather-bound edition of the Pope's environmental encyclical, Laudato Si, signed personally by the pontiff. The document, published in 2015, had called for urgent action on climate change and environmental degradation, themes that resonated deeply with the king's own environmental advocacy. This reflects our shared concern for God's creation, Pope Francis explained as he handed over the book. Charles accepted the gift with visible appreciation, understanding its significance beyond mere protocol. The encyclical represented one of the most important papal statements on environmental issues in modern history, and receiving a signed copy acknowledged his own role as an environmental champion. "Your Holiness, I have followed your teachings on climate change with great interest," Charles replied. "This will hold a place of honor in my library." For Queen Camilla, the Pope presented a beautiful rosary made from olive wood from the Holy Land, blessed specifically for this occasion. The olive wood symbolized peace and had been carved by craftsmen in Bethlehem, connecting the gift to Christianity's most sacred sites. "May this bring you peace and remind you of our prayers," Pope Francis said as he placed the rosary in an elegant wooden box. Camilla was deeply touched by the personal nature of the gift. Though not Catholic herself, she understood the spiritual significance of the rosary and the blessing it represented. "Thank you, Your Holiness. I will treasure this always," she responded, her voice reflecting genuine emotion. The Pope also presented both monarchs with specially minted papal medals commemorating their visit. These bronze medals, created by Vatican artisans, bore the Pope's coat of arms on one side and an image representing peace and unity on the other. Such medals were rare honors, usually reserved for heads of state and other dignitaries of the highest rank. In return, King Charles presented Pope Francis with several gifts that reflected both British tradition and personal thoughtfulness. The first was a specially commissioned piece of pottery from the king's own Highgrove estate, created by artisans who worked with sustainable materials and traditional methods. The piece depicted scenes from British religious history, including images of ancient monasteries and cathedrals that had been centers of learning and faith for over 1,000 years. The king also offered a rare first edition of a book about interfaith dialogue written by a prominent Anglican theologian, inscribed with a personal message expressing his hopes for continued cooperation between their respective churches. The book represented Charles's intellectual approach to faith and his belief that different religious traditions could learn from each other. Queen Camilla presented Pope Francis with a collection of photographs taken during royal visits to Commonwealth countries with significant Catholic populations. The images showed the royal family participating in interfaith ceremonies, visiting Catholic schools and hospitals, and meeting with local religious leaders. Each photograph was accompanied by a brief description of the event and its significance for community relations. The gift exchange concluded with Pope Francis presenting the royal couple with his apostolic blessing, a formal document written in Latin and illuminated by hand in the Vatican scriptorium. This blessing extended not just to the king and queen personally, but to the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The parchment, decorated with gold leaf and religious imagery, would become a treasured document in the royal collection. As the formal audience concluded, Pope Francis walked with his guests toward the door of the papal library, their conversation continuing in a more relaxed manner. The successful meeting had exceeded everyone's expectations, creating a foundation for future collaboration between the Vatican and the British Crown. Monsignor Sapienza reappeared to escort the royal couple through the next phase of their Vatican visit, a private tour of areas normally closed to the public. This extraordinary privilege reflected the high regard in which Pope Francis held his British visitors and his desire to share the Vatican's spiritual and artistic heritage with them. Their first stop was the Sistine Chapel, empty of tourists for this special visit. Without the crowds and noise of regular visiting hours, the chapel took on an almost ethereal quality. The afternoon light streaming through the high windows illuminated Michelangelo's frescoes in a way that few people ever witnessed. Queen Camilla stood in the center of the chapel, slowly turning to take in a magnificent ceiling that had taken Michelangelo 4 years to complete. The scenes from Genesis seemed to come alive in the quiet space, each figure telling part of humanity's story according to Christian tradition. "It's overwhelming," she whispered to her husband, "to think that one man created all of this." King Charles was particularly drawn to Michelangelo's The Last Judgment on the altar wall, completed nearly 30 years after the ceiling frescoes. The dramatic scene of souls being judged for eternity reflected the serious responsibility that both the Pope and the King carried in their respective roles as spiritual and temporal leaders. Monsignor Sapienza explained how the chapel served not just as a masterpiece of Renaissance art, but as the site where papal conclaves elected new popes. When Pope Francis was elected in 2013, he sat in this very room as Cardinal Bergoglio, waiting to see if God would call him to lead the church, the Monsignor explained. The thought of that momentous decision being made in such a sacred space added another layer of meaning to their visit. Their tour continued to the Apostolic Archive, formerly known as the Vatican Secret Archive, which housed some of the most important documents in Christian history. Dr. Sergio Pagano, the archive's prefect, personally guided them through temperature-controlled rooms where papal bulls, diplomatic correspondence, and theological treatises spanning nearly 2,000 years were preserved. The royal couple was shown documents relating to England's break with Rome during the reign of Henry VIII, including correspondence between Pope Clement VII and various English bishops who had tried to prevent the schism. Reading these centuries-old letters provided a sobering reminder of how far relations between Britain and the Vatican had come since those turbulent times. Dr. Pagano also presented documents from more recent papal visits to Britain, including preparations for Pope John Paul II's historic 1982 visit and Pope Benedict XVI 2010 state visit. These files showed the careful diplomatic work required to arrange such visits and the significance they held for both Catholic and Protestant communities in Britain. Queen Camilla was particularly interested in letters from British Catholics to various popes throughout history, expressing their loyalty to both their faith and their country during times when the two loyalties seemed to conflict. These personal testimonies revealed the human cost of religious and political divisions and the courage required to maintain one's beliefs in difficult circumstances. The tour moved to the Vatican Gardens, a private oasis within the city-state that few outsiders ever see. These beautifully maintained gardens provided a place of reflection and prayer for the Pope and serve as a symbol of creation's beauty and diversity. The head gardener, an elderly Italian man who had worked in the gardens for over 40 years, personally guided them through the various sections. Each area of the gardens represented different aspects of the natural world. Formal Italian gardens with precisely trimmed hedges, English cottage gardens with wildflowers and herbs, and even a small section dedicated to native Mediterranean plants. The diversity reflected the universal nature of the Catholic Church and its embrace of different cultures and traditions. In the garden's center stood a replica of the Grotto of Lourdes, where Pope Francis often came to pray. The peaceful setting, with its statue of the Virgin Mary and flowing water, provided a stark contrast to the busy administrative areas of the Vatican. Here, surrounded by nature and silence, the spiritual dimension of the papal office became most apparent. King Charles, with his lifelong love of gardening and environmental conservation, was deeply impressed by the garden's sustainable practices. Solar panels hidden among the trees provided renewable energy, composting systems recycled organic waste, and native plants reduced the need for irrigation. The Vatican's commitment to environmental stewardship aligned perfectly with the king's own initiatives at his various residences. As they walked through the gardens, the royal couple encountered several Vatican employees taking their lunch break in the shade of ancient olive trees. These workers, who maintained the buildings and grounds of the Vatican, represented the hundreds of people who made the Pope's ministry possible. Their respectful greetings to the royal visitors reflected the international character of the Vatican workforce. The garden tour concluded at a small chapel dedicated to St. Peter, built on the site where tradition held that the apostle was crucified. This simple stone structure, much older than the grand basilica bearing Peter's name, provided a direct connection to Christianity's earliest days. Standing in this ancient space, both the king and queen felt the weight of the history they were part of. Their final stop within the Vatican was the papal apartments, where Pope Francis lived in surprising simplicity. Unlike his predecessors who had resided in the ornate apostolic palace, Pope Francis had chosen to live in the Casa Santa Marta, a guest house with modest rooms that reflected his commitment to humility and accessibility. The Pope's private chapel, where he celebrated daily Mass with Vatican staff and guests, was small and unadorned compared to the grand churches nearby. The simple altar, wooden crucifix, and plain vestments emphasized substance over ceremony, reflecting the Pope's focus on service rather than status. In his private study, Pope Francis showed his guests personal mementos from his time as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, photographs of the poor communities he had served, letters from parishioners, and simple religious objects that had spiritual significance far beyond their material value. These items revealed the man behind the papal office and the experiences that had shaped his approach to leadership. The Pope's library contained not just theological works, but also books on social justice, environmental science, and interfaith dialogue. Volumes by Protestant theologians, Jewish scholars, and even secular philosophers showed his openness to learning from different perspectives and traditions. This intellectual curiosity had informed his papacy and made him an effective partner for dialogue with other faith communities. As their private tour concluded, Pope Francis joined them once more for a brief conversation about their impressions of the Vatican. Both the king and queen expressed their amazement at the Vatican's combination of historical preservation and modern relevance. They had expected grandeur and ceremony, but had also discovered a living institution actively engaged with contemporary challenges. The Pope shared his own reflections on leadership and the challenges of maintaining ancient institutions in a rapidly changing world. "We must be like old wine in new wineskins," he said, using a biblical metaphor to describe the balance between tradition and adaptation. The message remains the same, but how we share it must speak to each generation. King Charles nodded in understanding, recognizing similar challenges in his own role as monarch of a modern constitutional monarchy. The crown had survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character and values. The Vatican had done the same for nearly 2 millennia. As the afternoon drew to a close, preparations began for the royal couple's departure from Vatican City. However, one final surprise awaited them. Pope Francis had arranged for them to meet briefly with a group of young people from around the world who were participating in a Vatican Youth Conference. These 20 young adults, representing every continent and various Christian denominations, had come to Rome to discuss faith's role in addressing global challenges. Their presence reminded everyone that the future of both the Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion depended on engaging the next generation of believers. The informal conversation with these young people provided a refreshing contrast to the formal protocols of the day. They asked direct questions about leadership, faith, and social responsibility that revealed their serious engagement with contemporary issues. Their energy and idealism impressed both the king and queen, who saw in them hope for the future. One young woman from Nigeria asked Queen Camilla about balancing public duties with personal faith, while a seminarian from Brazil questioned King Charles about the role of monarchy in promoting social justice. These conversations demonstrated that young people around the world were grappling with serious questions about how ancient institutions could address modern problems. The meeting with young people also highlighted the global nature of both the Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion. These institutions transcended national boundaries and cultural differences, providing networks of faith and service that span the entire world. The Vatican visit had reminded everyone of the potential for cooperation across denominational lines in service of common goals. As the time for departure approached, Pope Francis presented one final gesture of friendship. He had arranged for the bells of St. Peter's Basilica to ring as the royal motorcade departed Vatican City. This honor, reserved for the most distinguished guests, would serve as a public acknowledgement of the historic nature of their visit and the Pope's personal regard for his British visitors. The sound of St. Peter's bells echoing across Vatican City created an emotional moment as King Charles and Queen Camilla prepared for their departure. The ancient bronze bells, some dating back centuries, had announced countless historic moments: papal elections, significant deaths, feast days, and state visits. Now, they marked the conclusion of a meeting that would influence relations between Britain and the Vatican for years to come. Vatican staff lined the route from the papal apartments to the San Damaso courtyard, offering respectful bows and warm smiles as the royal couple passed. These workers, representing dozens of nationalities and speaking multiple languages, embodied the international character of the Catholic Church. Their genuine enthusiasm for the royal visit reflected the positive impression that Charles and Camilla had made during their time in Vatican City. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, joined the farewell ceremony in the courtyard. As the Pope's principal deputy for diplomatic affairs, Cardinal Parolin had been instrumental in arranging the royal visit and ensuring its success. His presence emphasized the Vatican's view of this meeting as a significant diplomatic achievement that would strengthen relations between the Holy See and the United Kingdom. The Swiss Guard performed their traditional ceremony as the royal motorcade prepared to depart. Their precision and discipline, maintained for over 5 centuries, provided a visual reminder of the Vatican's long history and enduring traditions. The colorful uniforms and ceremonial halberds created a striking contrast to the modern security equipment used by both Vatican and British protection services. Pope Francis personally escorted his guests to their vehicle, an unusual honor that demonstrated his respect for the British monarchy and his hope for continued cooperation. As they walked across the ancient cobblestones, the Pope shared a few final thoughts about their conversation and its significance for both their institutions. "Today we have built bridges," Pope Francis said, his voice carrying the weight of historical understanding. "For too long, our churches have been separated by walls built centuries ago. You have helped us begin to replace those walls with windows through which we can see each other more clearly and work together more effectively." King Charles was moved by the Pope's words and the genuine warmth he had shown throughout their visit. "Your Holiness, this has been one of the most meaningful days of my reign," he replied. "The conversations we have shared and the friendship you have extended will guide my approach to interfaith relations for years to come." Queen Camilla added her own thanks for the Pope's hospitality and the extraordinary access they have been given to Vatican treasures and sacred spaces. "We leave here not just as representatives of Britain," she said, "but as friends of the Vatican who will work to strengthen the bonds between our peoples and our faiths." The final photographs captured the 3 leaders standing together in the afternoon sunlight, their faces reflecting the satisfaction of a successful diplomatic encounter. These images would appear in newspapers around the world, symbolizing the possibility of cooperation across religious and cultural boundaries. As the royal motorcade departed Vatican City through the Sant'Anna Gate, crowds of well-wishers had gathered in St. Peter's Square and along the nearby streets. Word of the successful papal audience had spread quickly through Rome's Catholic community, many of whom saw the royal visit as validation of their own faith's importance in global affairs. The journey back through Rome provided time for reflection on the extraordinary day they had experienced. The ancient city seemed different somehow, not just as a tourist destination or a historical curiosity, but as a living center of faith that continued to influence world events. The Vatican visit had reminded them that spiritual leadership remained relevant in an increasingly secular age. Back at their hotel, King Charles and Queen Camilla met with British Ambassador to Italy, Edward Llewellyn, to debrief on the successful Vatican visit. Ambassador Llewellyn, who had helped coordinate the logistics of the papal audience, was pleased with how smoothly everything had proceeded and the positive response from both Vatican officials and the international media. The discussion turned to the broader implications of the Vatican visit for British foreign policy and the UK's relationships with Catholic communities around the world. In many Commonwealth countries, Catholics comprise significant minorities or even majorities, and the Pope's warm reception of the British monarchs would strengthen the Crown's standing in these nations. Ambassador Llewellyn also briefed them on reactions from other European royal families and heads of state who had been following the Vatican visit closely. Many had expressed admiration for the diplomatic success and interest in arranging their own meetings with Pope Francis. The British royal family's positive experience would encourage other Protestant leaders to engage more actively with the Vatican. The media response to the Vatican visit exceeded all expectations, with coverage appearing not just in British newspapers, but in publications around the world. The visual impact of the Protestant monarchs meeting with the Catholic Pope created compelling images that transcended religious and cultural boundaries. Editorial writers praised the visit as a symbol of reconciliation and cooperation in an increasingly divided world. Catholic media outlets were particularly enthusiastic about the royal visit, seeing it as recognition of their faith's continued relevance and the Pope's effectiveness as a global leader. The warm relationship between Pope Francis and the British monarchs was cited as evidence of the Catholic Church's successful outreach to other Christian denominations. Anglican publications also responded positively, noting that King Charles's approach to interfaith dialogue reflected the best traditions of the Church of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been briefed on the Vatican visit, issued a statement praising the King's commitment to building bridges between different faith communities. The evening news broadcasts in Britain led with extensive coverage of the Vatican visit, featuring interviews with religious leaders, diplomatic experts, and ordinary citizens who saw the papal audience as a positive development. Public opinion polls conducted in the days following the visit showed strong approval for the King's interfaith initiative and his handling of his new role as monarch. International reaction was equally positive, with leaders from around the world praising the Vatican visit as an example of effective diplomacy and religious cooperation. The United States, where Catholics represented the largest single religious denomination, welcomed the improved relations between two of Christianity's most influential leaders. Even in countries with Protestant majorities, the Vatican visit was seen as a positive step toward greater religious tolerance and understanding. The image of King Charles and Pope Francis working together on issues like climate change and poverty reduction appealed to citizens who wanted their leaders to focus on practical solutions rather than theological differences. The success of the Vatican visit also had practical implications for ongoing diplomatic initiatives. British officials began exploring opportunities for collaboration with Vatican representatives on issues like human trafficking, religious persecution, and refugee assistance. The Pope's global network of contacts and moral authority could prove valuable allies in addressing these challenges. Plans were immediately set in motion for reciprocal visits and ongoing dialogue between Anglican and Catholic leaders. The Archbishop of Canterbury announced his intention to visit Pope Francis in Rome within the next year, while Vatican officials expressed interest in attending future Anglican Consultative Council meetings. Educational exchanges between Anglican and Catholic institutions gained new momentum following the royal visit. Universities, seminaries, and schools began developing programs that would allow students and faculty to study each other's traditions and learn from different approaches to faith and scholarship. The Vatican visit also strengthened the king's relationship with Catholic communities throughout the United Kingdom. British Catholics, who had sometimes felt like a marginalized minority despite their long history in the country, welcomed the royal recognition of their faith's importance and the Pope's positive assessment of their monarch. In Northern Ireland, where religious differences had fueled decades of conflict, the Vatican visit was seen as particularly significant. The sight of Protestant and Catholic leaders working together in mutual respect provided a powerful example for communities still healing from past divisions. Scottish Catholics also responded enthusiastically to the royal visit, noting King Charles's obvious comfort with Catholic traditions and his genuine respect for the Pope. This was especially meaningful given Scotland's complex religious history and the ongoing debates about independence and identity. The Commonwealth realms watched the Vatican visit with special interest, as many of these nations had significant Catholic populations. In countries like Malta, Ireland, and several Caribbean nations, the royal family's positive relationship with the Pope strengthened their own connections to the crown. Australian Catholics were particularly pleased with the Vatican visit, as they represented the largest religious denomination in a country where the monarch serves as head of state. The papal audience demonstrated that the crown could effectively represent citizens of all faiths, not just Anglicans. Canadian response was similarly positive, with Catholic leaders in Quebec and other provinces praising King Charles's inclusive approach to religious leadership. The successful Vatican visit helped counter arguments that the monarchy was irrelevant or exclusionary in modern, multicultural societies. African Commonwealth countries with Catholic majorities or large minorities saw the Vatican visit as evidence of the Crown's commitment to serving all Commonwealth citizens regardless of their religious background. This was particularly important in nations where religious identity often intersected with ethnic and cultural divisions. The personal impact on King Charles and Queen Camilla was profound and lasting. Both later described the Vatican visit as one of the most meaningful experiences of their royal careers, providing insights into faith, leadership, and service that influenced their approach to monarchy. For Charles, the meeting with Pope Francis reinforced his belief that religious leaders must work together to address global challenges. The Pope's combination of spiritual authority and practical engagement with contemporary issues provided a model for how the monarchy could remain relevant in modern society. Queen Camilla was particularly moved by the Pope's personal warmth and his obvious concern for ordinary people around the world. His simple lifestyle and accessibility contrasted sharply with traditional images of papal grandeur, demonstrating that authentic leadership required humility and service rather than ceremony and status. Both monarchs were impressed by the Vatican's efficient organization and its ability to balance ancient traditions with modern needs. The papal administration's success in managing a global institution while maintaining its spiritual mission provided lessons applicable to their own roles as heads of a constitutional monarchy. The theological discussions during the Vatican visit also influenced the king's approach to his role as supreme governor of the Church of England. His conversations with Pope Francis about interfaith dialogue, social justice, and environmental stewardship informed his understanding of how established churches could serve diverse populations. The Vatican visit's success encouraged King Charles to pursue similar initiatives with leaders of other world religions. Plans were developed for meetings with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the chief rabbi, Muslim leaders, and representatives of other faith communities in Britain and around the world. These interfaith initiatives reflected the king's vision of the monarchy as a unifying institution that could bring people together across religious, ethnic, and cultural boundaries. The Vatican visit had demonstrated that such cooperation was not only possible, but mutually beneficial for all participants. The Queen Consort also emerged from the Vatican visit with enhanced confidence in her role and a clearer understanding of how she could contribute to the monarchy's mission. Her genuine interest in the Pope's social justice initiatives and her thoughtful questions during their conversations had made a positive impression on Vatican officials. The long-term impact of the Vatican visit continued to unfold in the months and years that followed, influencing everything from diplomatic relations to interfaith dialogue to public perceptions of both the monarchy and the Catholic Church. The success of this historic meeting created a foundation for ongoing cooperation that would benefit both institutions and the communities they served. As their Roman sojourn continued with other diplomatic and cultural events, King Charles and Queen Camilla carried with them the memory of their extraordinary Vatican experience and the friendship they had forged with Pope Francis. The bonds created during that April afternoon in 2023 would influence their reign and their understanding of faith's role in public life for decades to come. The evening following the Vatican visit brought an unexpected invitation that would add another dimension to the royal couple's Roman experience. Cardinal Gianfranco Ravasi, the Vatican's Minister of Culture, requested an audience with King Charles and Queen Camilla at the Palazzo al Temps, one of Rome's most prestigious museums housing ancient Roman sculptures and artifacts. Cardinal Ravasi, a renowned scholar and intellectual who had spent decades building bridges between faith and culture, wanted to show the royal couple how the Vatican engaged with secular academia and artistic communities. This meeting represented another aspect of papal diplomacy that often remained invisible to the public, but played a crucial role in the Church's global influence. The Palazzo al Temps, with its Renaissance courtyard and carefully restored frescoes, provided an elegant setting for this cultural dialogue. As they walked through galleries filled with ancient Roman statues and mosaics, Cardinal Ravasi explained how the Vatican had become one of the world's most important patrons of art and scholarship, preserving treasures that belong to all humanity regardless of religious belief. Queen Camilla was particularly fascinated by the cardinal's explanation of how ancient pagan art had been preserved and studied by Christian scholars throughout the centuries. Rather than destroying these artifacts as remnants of false gods, the Church had recognized their artistic and historical value, creating one of history's most successful examples of cultural preservation across religious boundaries. The conversation turned to contemporary challenges facing cultural institutions in an increasingly secular and commercial world. Cardinal Ravasi spoke passionately about the need to maintain spaces for contemplation and beauty in societies obsessed with efficiency and profit. His words resonated with King Charles, who had long advocated for traditional arts and crafts in an age of mass production. They discussed the role of beauty in human life and its connection to spiritual experience, regardless of specific religious beliefs. The cardinal argued that great art could serve as a bridge between different faith traditions and even between believers and non-believers, creating shared experiences of wonder and transcendence that revealed common human longings. This cultural dimension of the Vatican visit provided insights into the complexity of papal influence that extended far beyond religious doctrine or diplomatic relations. The Catholic Church's role as a patron of education, art, and scholarship affected millions of people who might never set foot in a church, but benefited from institutions and collections maintained by religious communities. As they examined ancient mosaics depicting scenes from daily life in imperial Rome, King Charles reflected on the continuity of human experience across centuries and cultures. The same concerns that had occupied Romans 2,000 years ago, love, family, work, meaning, still shaped human life in the modern era, suggesting fundamental truths that transcended specific historical circumstances. The evening's cultural exploration concluded with a small dinner hosted by the British Embassy to Italy, bringing together Vatican officials, Italian government representatives, and members of Rome's international community. This gathering provided opportunities for informal conversation that often proved more valuable than formal diplomatic meetings. Ambassador Llewellyn had carefully selected guests who represented the diverse networks that connected Britain to Italy and the broader European community. The dinner conversation ranged from ancient history to contemporary politics, from artistic preservation to climate change, creating the kind of wide-ranging dialogue that characterized effective diplomacy. Pope Francis had sent a personal representative to the dinner, Monsignor Paul Ty, who served as secretary of the Pontifical Council for Culture. His presence indicated the Vatican's commitment to maintaining the positive momentum generated by the royal visit and exploring practical opportunities for future collaboration. During the dinner, several concrete initiatives emerged from the conversations begun at the Vatican. British universities expressed interest in partnering with Vatican institutions on research projects related to manuscript preservation and archaeological studies. These academic exchanges would create lasting connections between scholars from different countries and faith traditions. The discussion also touched on the potential for joint environmental initiatives, building on the shared commitment to climate action that King Charles and Pope Francis had discovered during their meeting. Vatican City's sustainable practices and the King's environmental initiatives at his own estates could serve as models for other institutions around the world. Queen Camilla found herself in conversation with Sister Alessandra Smarilli, an Italian nun who served as an economic advisor to the Vatican. Sister Alessandra's work on sustainable development and social economics reflected the Church's engagement with contemporary challenges through rigorous academic study and practical application. Their conversation revealed another dimension of Vatican influence that often escaped public attention. The global network of religious women who serve in roles ranging from healthcare and education to economic development and scientific research. These sisters and nuns represented a largely unrecognized force for social progress around the world. The dinner also included Italian government officials who had worked on arrangements for the papal visit, providing insights into how the Vatican functioned as both a spiritual center and an independent state within Italian territory. These complex relationships required constant diplomatic attention and mutual respect for sovereignty and tradition. As the evening concluded, King Charles and Queen Camilla expressed their gratitude for the extraordinary hospitality they had received not just at the Vatican, but throughout their Roman visit. The combination of formal diplomacy, cultural exploration, and personal conversation had created a comprehensive understanding of the Catholic Church's role in contemporary global affairs. The return journey to London the following morning provided time for the royal couple to process the many impressions and insights they had gained during their Vatican visit. The experience had exceeded their expectations and challenged some of their assumptions about both the Catholic Church and the possibilities for interfaith cooperation. On the flight home, they reviewed the commitments they had made and the initiatives they wanted to pursue based on their Vatican conversations. The papal audience had been just the beginning of what they hoped would become ongoing collaboration between the British Crown and the Holy See on issues of mutual concern. King Charles spent considerable time reviewing the notes he had taken during his conversation with Pope Francis, identifying specific areas where Anglican and Catholic institutions could work together effectively. Climate change, poverty reduction, and religious freedom emerged as priority areas for future collaboration. Queen Camilla reflected on the personal impact of meeting Pope Francis and experiencing the Vatican's unique combination of spiritual authority and practical engagement with world affairs. The visit had deepened her understanding of her own role as Queen Consort and the opportunities it provided for meaningful service. The media coverage of their Vatican visit continued to generate positive responses from around the world, with editorial writers and religious leaders praising the royal couple's approach to interfaith dialogue and their obvious comfort with Catholic traditions and leadership. This coverage reinforced the diplomatic success of the visit and its potential for long-term impact. Upon their return to London, King Charles immediately scheduled meetings with the Archbishop of Canterbury and other Anglican leaders to share insights from his Vatican conversations and explore ways to build on the positive momentum generated by the papal audience. These discussions would inform the Church of England's approach to ecumenical relations and social action. The king also met with representatives of Britain's Catholic community, including Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the Archbishop of Westminster. These meetings provided opportunities to discuss how the improved relations between the Crown and the Vatican could benefit British Catholics and strengthen their integration into national life. Parliament took note of the successful Vatican visit, with members from both major parties praising the king's diplomatic skills and his contribution to Britain's international relationships. The visit was seen as evidence that the monarchy continued to play a valuable role in British foreign policy and cultural diplomacy. The Commonwealth Secretariat also expressed interest in learning from the Vatican visit's success, as many Commonwealth nations had significant Catholic populations that could benefit from improved relations between the Crown and the Holy See. Plans were developed for sharing best practices and exploring similar initiatives in other realms and territories. International religious organizations took note of the Vatican visit's success as a model for interfaith cooperation and dialogue. The World Council of Churches, which included Anglican provinces around the world, expressed particular interest in building on the momentum created by the royal audience with Pope Francis. Academic institutions began developing research projects focused on the historical relationship between Britain and the Vatican, examining how centuries of conflict and cooperation had shaped both institutions. These scholarly initiatives would provide context for understanding the contemporary significance of improved relations. The Vatican visit also influenced public opinion research about the monarchy's role in modern British society. Polls showed increased support for the king's approach to interfaith relations and his efforts to serve all British citizens regardless of their religious background. This was particularly significant among younger citizens who might otherwise question the monarchy's relevance. British Catholics reported feeling greater pride in their citizenship and stronger connections to the Crown following the successful Vatican visit. This was especially meaningful in Northern Ireland, where Catholic identity had sometimes been seen as incompatible with loyalty to the British state. The long-term institutional impact of the Vatican visit became apparent as both Anglican and Catholic institutions began developing formal mechanisms for ongoing dialogue and cooperation. These structural changes would outlast individual leaders and create permanent channels for communication and collaboration. Educational initiatives emerged as one of the most promising areas for continued cooperation between Anglican and Catholic institutions. Schools, colleges, and universities began developing exchange programs and joint curricula that would expose students to different faith traditions while maintaining their own religious identities. The Vatican visit's success also encouraged other European monarchies to strengthen their own relationships with the Holy See, creating a network of royal houses committed to interfaith dialogue and cooperation. This development reflected broader trends toward religious pluralism and tolerance in contemporary European societies. As the first anniversary of the Vatican visit approached, plans were developed for follow-up initiatives that would demonstrate the lasting impact of the papal audience. King Charles and Pope Francis maintained their correspondence, discussing ongoing challenges and opportunities for collaboration between their institutions. The Vatican visit of April 2023 had achieved far more than its original diplomatic objectives, creating a foundation for ongoing cooperation that would influence both the British monarchy and the Catholic Church for generations to come. The personal friendship between King Charles and Pope Francis had become a symbol of hope for religious reconciliation and peaceful cooperation in an increasingly divided world. The legacy of that extraordinary day in Rome continued to inspire religious leaders, diplomats, and ordinary citizens who believed in the possibility of building bridges across ancient divisions. The image of Protestant monarchs and a Catholic pope working together in mutual respect and shared purpose provided a powerful example of how traditional institutions could adapt to contemporary challenges while maintaining their essential character and mission. The Vatican visit had demonstrated that effective leadership in the modern world required not just political skill or administrative competence, but also the wisdom to recognize common ground across different traditions and the courage to build new relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. King Charles and Pope Francis had shown that such leadership was not only possible, but essential for addressing the complex challenges facing humanity in the 21st century.